This podcast is about introducing our fans to the animals, plants, and other products that we work with at Josh's Frogs. It's an opportunity to paint a picture of our hobby that is refreshing. We want you guys to be successful with the animals that you're keeping, and we want our hobby to grow ethically and sustainably into the future. Hello, my name is Josh, and I'm here with the Josh's Frogs podcast. Today I have Zach. We're going to talk about leucomelas dart frogs. But before we do that, the Josh's Frogs podcast is brought to you by joshsfrogs.com. We're your one-stop shop. We breed all the animals here on site. We're doing captive bred only. And then we carry everything you need to take care of those animals. So caging, substrates, heating, lighting, hides, all that type of stuff. We carry that, as well as live plants and the live feeder insects you need to take care of those animals. So check us out, joshsfrogs.com. We like to educate our customers, so we have a very robust YouTube channel with a bunch of videos on how to set things up and take care of our animals properly, as well as a bunch of blogs and articles that Zach and some of the people here have written over the years. We just want to make keeping your animals easy. So check us out, joshsfrogs.com. Without further ado, welcome Zach. Zach, if you'll just remind us your story. When did you start working here, and what is it that you do here at Josh's Frogs?
Many moons ago. No, I think it'll be 17 years, so in 07.
Wow.
I started doing shows and building custom tanks, and shows worked out and custom tanks did not. And just did a little bit of everything over the years, and now I oversee live operations, or as I like to call it, the fun part of the business.
Yeah.
Some people may disagree, mainly those people out of live operations, but the plants, insects, and animals. So
cool.
The life stuff.
Cool. Now, today we're going to talk about leucomelas dart frogs, which I know is a one of your favorite dart frogs. Can you kind of describe what are leucomelas, and then maybe walk us through some of the different varieties that are in the hobby right now?
Yeah, I've got some live guys with me. So Dendrobates leucomelas, it's commonly called the bumblebee poison dart frog because it's primarily black and yellow. Contrary to its scientific name, Dendrobates, tree walker, and then leucomelas, white and black. Thinks it's kind of weird until you think about taking an animal and putting it in a little container full of alcohol and then sending it across the ocean to be described, and they lose those colorful pigments. Yeah. So that's kind of where that came from. They're found primarily in the northern and mid ranges through the Guianas, central South America. A little bit in Brazil. A lot of the animals in the hobby come from British Guiana or primarily Venezuela. Yeah. And then they creep into little areas along there too. They're one of the smaller dart frogs. They're the Tinctorius clade, so like Truncatus, Tinctorius, and Auratus. They're closely related. They're a really good beginner frog. Mm-hmm. A lot of people consider them the best. Me too. Yep. They have a nice loud call. Like almost all dart frogs are diurnal, so they're awake when you are. And they're great in groups. So even if you, you've heard of like Tinctorius or some dart frogs where males and females can fight. It can still happen with Tinctorius, but it's a lot less likely, and it's a lot more minor. Yep. So it's really easy to get like a group, depending on tank size, like 4 to 6, and house them together. And then after about 8 to 10 months, they start calling. Some of the morphs, like the banded morphs, tend to be a little quieter. Mm-hmm. But overall, you end up with a not quite as bold as Tinctorius, but not as shy as some of the Auratus frogs that, they're easy to breed. They tend to be seasonal, so you don't tend to get swamped with babies. And they're just, a pleasant dart frog, really easy to start out with. They were my first dart frogs.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
They're good ones.
Cool. Talk about some of the different varieties we have in the hobby. What are some of your favorite? Some of the more common, less common varieties?
Yeah. There's a bunch of different varieties. Back about 12, 13 years ago, when I was really focused on acquiring a bunch of different leucomelas, I was able to track down original import years, and that's where the 1995 or Greenfoot import. The 96 import were animals that I got, I think F2s or F3s, somewhere around there, from Cindy Dickin of Vivarium Concepts down in Wiley, Texas at the time. And actually it's cool, that was a group of 5 animals. 3 of those are actually still around downstairs, and I think they may be able to drink this year, actually, based on their age, and they're still breeding pretty well. Yep. So they can last a long time. They're awesome frogs. So one of the more common ones that's really well known are fine spot lukes. Don't know if we want to zoom in or do anything here or check them out later. But they're a really cool luke. They're a smaller leucomelas. They have some bands, but they tend to be finer, and then a lot of dots on them. Yeah. They can be a little more challenging to breed than some of the other lukes. There's primarily 2 lines in the U.S., even though that's kind of been muddled. Yeah. There was a NAIB or National Aquarium Baltimore line where One parent was a fine spot, one parent was a normal because they didn't have one of the opposite sex. And so they tended to be a little bit bigger. Their spotting wasn't as fine, but they bred a little bit easier. And then there was a European line that was a smaller animal, had a lot more yellow on it, was more difficult to breed, possibly a little bit of generational inbreeding going on there.
Yep.
But that was thought to be representative of that like wild type population.
Oh, that's cool.
They're a cool little frog. There's banded, which is kind of divided into two. There's the banded luke that's been in a hobby for longer that looks almost like a giant lamani or something. One of the obligates where they have very even bands. They're larger. They tend to be one of the shyer leucomelas in my experience, but they're just a really cool big frog. And they look really different. They have very little to no spotting outside, maybe a big spot on their head and an occasional spot on their side. And they can be big, and they can have really big egg clutches. I've had egg clutches over 20 out of some of these females.
That's very large for any dart frog besides a phyllobates.
Yeah, on the other end of that, like the smaller, like the European fine spot lukes, 3 to 5, 6 eggs was pretty common.
Wow.
And for some of these, it was pretty big. It's comparable to some like the really large Tinctorius or so. And they're cool. They just tended to be a little bit shyer. I got them to call and got them to breed more consistently when I gave them a really heavy cycle. So really dried out, lower food, lower humidity for about half the year, and then really once spring came around here, with barometric pressure changes, increasing the MistKing feeding, and cycle them up. Another bandids are referred to as British Guiana, or and they used to be called just banded lukes in the hobby too, and they were just a different import. We started calling them British Guiana lukes because not sure where the other bandids actually came out of.
Yeah.
These came out of British Guiana, and they have a lot more black to where they almost have like almost pencil thin yellow on them. They look kind of like a banded imitator or a Fantastica in that regards. They're cool. They're a little bit bolder than other banded lukes. They're not quite as big, but they have pretty good egg clutches, often in the teens or so. They're pretty neat animals.
Those are cool. One thing I wanted to remind us, we talk about poison dart frogs. We always want to make people understand like that these guys in captivity aren't harmless. So can I talk about where they get their poison from?
And even in the wild, leucomelas, you could eat as many as you want. You're not going to die. You might, but not for those reasons. But anyway, they're toxic in the fact that they like taste bad, or they'll leave a little bit of a burning sensation in your mouth. I remember years and years ago when we imported some, I think there were some of the British Guiana lukes to start a founding population here, and I had handled them and wore gloves smartly enough. Scratched my nose without taking my glove off, not even thinking about it. A little bit got in this kind of the edge of my eye membrane, and it burned for like 20 minutes. And after about 5 minutes, I realized I wasn't going to die, and it was fine.
Yeah.
But they're not as toxic as like say phyllobates.
Yep.
But even then, they're getting all of those toxins from their diet in the wild. So various various gnats, mites, little bugs you find in the soil that are eating a bunch of different plants and fungus and bacteria. The body is processing all that and turning it into batrachotoxin, so basically frog poison.
Yep.
That's just used, for self-defense. So in captivity, you don't have to worry about any of that.
Cool. So. Thank you for doing that. I always want to make sure that we're doing that when we're talking about these guys.
Cool. These are standard lukes. So leucomelas, you'll see a lot of leucomelas. They're sold without an import information. They're sometimes sold as Venezuelan leucomelas. We call them standard lukes because we had leucomelas on our site, and then we started breeding all these other different lukes, and we're like, well, it feels weird just to have one called luke, so we need to call them something. So we call them standard. They're typical, non-import specific from Venezuela. They're a medium-sized frog, a little bit bigger than a Rhodus. And they're probably your great all-around pet. And as far as price point, those are that $40 to $50 kind of. They're a good entry-level, dart frog for somebody who's looking for it. This particular one is actually it's not. I've actually got a pair here. There we go. So you can look a little bit about size difference and everything. You see the male and the female. The male's right there. The female's bigger. When they're the same age, the females are going to be a little bit larger, a little bit longer, and more pear-shaped. Where if you look on the male sides, they tend to be kind of more like parallel to each other.
Yeah.
And then if you look on the underside, under the chin or whatnot, especially if a male's been calling for a while, even of the quieter types, you'll see some kind of grayish stretch marks on the bottom of that patch. Lukes aren't as easy to sex as Tinctorius or some of the other dart frogs. So another great reason always buy a group of them. You get 4, you have an 88% chance of getting a pair. And if you always have extras, they're always fun to trade and stuff. They're a frog that's, I don't know, been in demand long before I got in a hobby, and I'm sure it'll still be in demand long after I'm not around. So
one of the things I love about them is the call, and I'm hoping during this podcast they'll start calling. One of them will start.
Yeah, it's a little chilly in here, so maybe, but it's a loud. It's almost like a bird-like call. It's definitely not something that you if you're trying to keep these, I don't know, secret from your roommate
Yeah.
or something, you probably, this isn't the frog for you. They do call a little bit right in the morning and the evening, but I found they primarily would call like in the afternoon. When I was in college, I had for one set of roommates, we actually started these out in a tank in a dining room. And eventually they moved into my bedroom, and then we had other sets of roommates moved in who weren't aware of them, and one of them just always thought I had birds in my closet or something because these guys would call. So for a dart frog, it's a pretty loud call, but really pleasant, really melodical. So
Talk a little bit about how we set them up here at Josh's Frogs and how we recommend our customers set them up.
Just your basic traditional vivarium for lukes will do just fine. Your false bottom, substrate barrier, ABG mix or dart frog biobedding, either or. Dart frog biobedding is nice. It's a little bit more environmentally friendly.
Yep.
Already comes packed with some beneficial fungus and stuff. Seed with your basic springtails, dwarf white isopods, then small thin layer of sphagnum moss, and then leaf litter on top of that with live plants. Leucomelas are still considered terrestrial, but they will utilize a lot of space off the ground, especially males. So providing them with broadleaf plants or hardscape, a lot of structure to climb on and to perch and call from is really cool, especially if you have a big tank. Intentionally putting 2 or 3 perches spread around there, you can get males yelling at each other for half the day. Doesn't do any harm to them, and is a lot of fun to watch and listen to.
They're really cool and unique that they spend a little bit more time up and climbing up as opposed to most other dart frogs. That's really cool. You talked a little bit about how you sex the frogs. At what age are they starting to produce eggs? And you talked a little bit about cycling. Talk a little bit about how we do that here.
Yeah, it varies on the type. So for some of your standard lukes, you'll have males start calling at 8-10 months. I think I've had some particularly strong individuals even call closer to 6 before. Females generally start producing eggs between 12 to 14 months. That can take a little bit longer. I used to work with this really uncommon variety called a bluefoot leucomelas, and it was close to 2 years before they did anything. And I've heard from people like 2 to 4 years is pretty typical with them. And those are a really cool looking frog, but they're also probably one of the shyest frogs I've ever owned. As far as cycling goes, it's something for until you start to get eggs or a lot of breeding activity, I wouldn't worry about cycling the first time. Just let them mature, let them build up a lot of body fat, a lot of reserves, get healthy, and just put all that energy into growth instead of reproduction. But after they've bred for a while and you want them to, kind of slow down or breed again, really reducing the mistings, you can reduce the photo period. So instead of just 12 on, 12 off, which is perfectly fine for them year round, if you can have, during one part of the year, have maybe like 14 on and 10 hours off, and then vice versa the other end of the year. And then during that lower photo period time, reduce misting. You can cut feeding in half as long as you watch them.
Yep.
With a lot of my lukes, I treat them like I would my galax and such, which are really seasonal breeders, where I would actually make sure I had a little cup of water or pool of water in there so I could cut way down on misting without having to worry about them ever drying out from lack of water access.
Cool. Now you talked a little bit about egg clutch size. How long are they eggs? How long are they tadpoles? And how long till they come out of the water?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on temperatures, and it varies a little bit, I'm sure, based on morphs, but I've never noticed anything major. The big thing was clutch size. Some of the smaller varieties like fine spots or standards, 3 to 7, sometimes 8 eggs was pretty good. For some of the larger bandeds and stuff, into the low 20s. I think I had one clutch I was around like 26, 27 eggs. That was pretty crazy.
Wow.
When they are eggs, within a few days, you'll see if not a couple days, you can actually see where they're fertile. Initially, they're just little brown or little gray spheres. And you'll see a little line form across the top. That's the animal pole, and it'll start to develop. And that was what will turn into the tadpole. And then the rest of the sphere will turn into the yolk sac over time as it differentiates. And then they'll eventually hatch out. Generally, when they hatch out, they've absorbed their gills, and they're all internal. That takes around 7 to 10 days, sometimes a little bit longer. Then when they're a free-swimming tadpole, depending on temperature, 6 weeks up to about 12 weeks until they're a froglet.
Wow.
So, when we say like an animal we sell, like a dart frog, we say it's 2 months old when we sell it to you. That means it's 2 months since it's out of the water. So that animal could be another 2 to 4 months older than that, realistically. If you count from like the point of, is it a frog at the point of fertilization or the point of being a tadpole or what? But,
Interesting. Now, you talked a little bit about cycling them and lowering humidity and lowering misting. Like during that wet season, what's the humidity you should be reaching for, and like what's the danger area in that like drier season?
Yeah. So on the wet season, look for 95 to 100% humidity. You can definitely keep it on the higher end if you have some internal circulation, like an internal fan in the tank. That's not absolutely necessary. Here we use full glass tops, and they're fine.
Yep.
We just mist a little bit less frequently. Back when I had my critter room all set up and thriving at home, that was I'd crank automated misting up to about 3 to 4 times, up for a total of about 2 minutes of misting a day, and have about a 30% vented top. So I misted a little bit more frequently, and then allowed it to drop in between mistings. You don't want to overwater, so you don't want to be flooding out your substrate, especially if you're automatic misting. Keep track of that.
Yep.
During the dry season, you always want them to have access to moisture. So a lot of times if you're using large leaf litter like sea grape or magnolia, you stick your fingers, even if you haven't misted for, say, a day, you can stick your fingers under that leaf litter and you can still feel a lot of moisture, and the frogs will just hunker down out there. I would always do something like a 4 ounce, just a 4 ounce deli cup, and kind of partially bury it in a substrate. Keep it full of some water just so they always had access to it if they needed to. And then I would never let the ambient humidity of the tank fall below about 65%.
Gotcha.
But they're always like, if I stuck a humidity probe in the leaf litter or in a bromeliad axle or something like that, it'd be 80 or 90%. There were always humid refuges. It just, the frogs got a lot less active, kind of hunkered down, didn't eat as much, and then got really excited to eat when I started making everything, a little bit more humid, and then it quickly led to calling and breeding.
Cool. On the scale from very easy to very difficult, where would you put leucomelas? And then what are any tips or tricks you give to people that are keeping those kinds of guys?
They're definitely on the easier end of the spectrum as far as keeping. As far as breeding, I would consider them around the middle, just because they're not difficult to breed, but they can be difficult to breed consistently.
Yeah.
And I do know people, and they tend to be in people where they're either always running a heater or always running an air conditioner, or something that would really affect, household humidity and stuff. Who have had success with some really hard frogs and then never bred leucomelas. They're really easy to keep, moderate to breeding, but definitely not what I would consider super difficult or anything. Start with a group, especially with a larger tank. You can keep 2 to 3 in something the size of an 18 cube, even though 3 adults would be pushing it. I always really enjoyed doing something like a 36-18-18 or something similar with a group of 4 to 6. How they interact with each other is a large part of the fun of watching them doing it, especially when you have 2 males claim different parts of the tank and kind of, duke it out through calling at each other and everything. But get a group of them, be patient with them. You don't have to cycle them, but you can kind of, if you do cycle them, you tend to get more successful breeding. You can plan around it. You can kind of control their activity and all that too. And it's just a lot of fun. Up here in Michigan, I was actually reverse cycling them. So during the spring and summer when, I was outside or traveling for work a lot or stuff like that, I'd cool them down so they didn't require as much attention. And then, come winter when I'm inside and it's bleak and white outside, I can have this little jungle box with a lot of nice calling tropical frogs to kind of cheer me up every morning.
That's cool. That's cool. So. That's cool. Definitely one of my favorite dart frogs as well too. So thanks a lot for educating us on the leucomelas dart frogs. We're going to move to a lightning round with some questions just to get to know you a little bit better.
Perfect.
All right. If money and space are no issue, what's your dream pet?
Dream pet. I feel like I need to answer this differently every time.
That's right.
Just to keep people on their toes. Right now, emerald tree skinks are pretty cool. My daughter saw some YouTube videos, I think from Clint's Reptiles on those the other week, and she's convinced she needs a green lizard in her bedroom now, and they're pretty darn neat.
Those are really cool. All right, besides Josh's Frogs, what's one brand in our hobby that's doing really cool products, or one breeder that's breeding some really cool animals?
Cool. Been a really big fan, and I was actually, just as I was we're renovating the basement right now, and I used to have 80 frog tanks in there, and now I'm down to a handful. And taking down some of the old equipment and pulling down some old MistKing pumps, and then I plugged them in, and I'm like, man, I know these things have been on a timer without a water supply and for I don't know how long, and they still run. So
that's cool.
Just for automated misting and just being able to kind of touch it and go and set up cycles, and even the ease of cycling dart frogs like leucomelas, I'd like to throw a call out to Marty and MistKing out there.
Cool. In all of the world, what's your favorite animal or plant right now?
Right now, like I said, I got to answer this differently. I like the right now qualifier. I am really enjoying building and growing some reef tanks with my daughter. I'm getting a really big kick out of all the aquacultured fish they're doing now, and corals. When I was involved in that when I was a high schooler, everything was wild caught. And stuff didn't last very long for the most part, and the equipment wasn't there. There's been a lot of change in that. It was really, really cool. We got an aquacultured yellow watchman goby the other weekend, which is a neat little fish. And the fact that they have a planktonic larval stage and they're really difficult to raise, and that fish was never saw the wild.
Yeah.
And I can enjoy it now. And
That's really
this
cool.
tank at home is really cool.
Yeah,
So,
that hobby's come a long way.
definitely.
All right, you got an hour of free time. Family's gone somewhere. You don't have anything to do. What are you doing with that hour of free time that you have to
I
yourself?
keep saying I'm reading, so I'd read, but especially since we've got this great 60-degree weather last week, when I had some time, it was reading and then also grilling and perfecting the perfect jalapeno popper.
Oh, cool.
So
cool.
that was good.
All right, you got a bunch of people listening to you. You have their ear. What's one piece of advice that you'd give to people, or one thing you tell people to remember? What would you tell the people?
Definitely to kind of, I guess, I don't know, embrace the unknown. I think especially when it comes to animal keeping, and also in other facets of our life, it's really easy to encounter something and you're like, I'm not sure how to do this.
Yeah.
And then pivot.
Yeah.
And instead just kind of diving in and, kind of really digging in and figuring out the why behind things. I think it can help a lot better with decision making.
Yeah.
And then it's really cool because it can help grow others around you
Yeah.
too.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing all the stuff on leucomelas, but then also just general advice for us as well, too. Thank you for doing that, Zach. Zach has been a staple at Josh's Frogs for a long time. You can go back in our YouTube library and see some really old videos of Zach from when Zach was much younger than he is now. So make sure you check those out. He's also written a bunch of stuff for us as well. So a lot of blog articles and how-to guides, those are written by him as well. So check out some of the stuff that he does. And then you'll see him on our social media from time to time talking about some of the stuff that we do. So check that out. So thanks a lot, Zach, for helping us learn a little bit more about leucomelas dart frogs.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us across social media. We always want to bring you the best content, so let us know what you think in the comments. And for all your reptile and amphibian needs, be sure to check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have an amazing selection. Until next time, stay curious, stay froggy, and keep exploring.